They've been called the best of the best, the elite, the Navy SEALs.
They're language trained, they're operationally savvy, they're street smart, they're strong, and they're mentally tough and self-disciplined.
A hero is not somebody who does something he isn't afraid to do. A hero is a guy who does something he is afraid to do.
You know, once you're a team member, you're always one, and it never leaves you.
You want something done, you challenge a SEAL.
Today's Navy SEAL is the ultimate precision weapon.
We take the jobs that nobody else wants and no one else can do.
They operate in the sea, from the air, on land, and finally, the blackness of space. Fighting in every conflict since World War II, their history has been shrouded in secrecy.
You're as limited in using a SEAL as your imagination or his will.
Forefathers to the SEALs, it was the early naval combat demolition units that cleared the beaches of Normandy.
There's a bond there that you can't explain. It stems from underwater demolition way back in the World War II.
Today we run around in jungle boots and camis and 30 pounds of gear on us, but we still have a connection with the naked warrior, the UDT man in World War II in a pair of shorts.
I had one guy come up to me and I told him, he asked me if I'd been a SEAL, and I said, yeah. He said, you don't look like a SEAL. I said, what's a SEAL supposed to look like?
In the jungles of Vietnam, SEALs defined deadly guerrilla warfare. And today, men of the Navy SEALs answer the call whenever a specialized military force is needed. A common thread all teammates share, whether they have bled on the beaches of Europe or the deserts of the Middle East. Each man must have first endured the most demanding training in the military. BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training.
It is without a doubt the most demanding physical program in the Department of Defense. But every single day is game day. And you could be a tremendous athlete, but you have got to be up and psychologically prepared for this program that will humble anybody.
Whether an officer or an enlisted man, admiral or seaman, they call themselves the teams.
It's a real close group of men. That 6 months training you go through a lot of pain.
I think I knew what I was in for, but I didn't know how bad it would hurt.
Team members spend their careers training, constantly striving for perfection. They are sent to almost every school in the military. This results in a highly intelligent and dynamic warrior.
Now,
I said, there is nothing that another human being has done that I can't do.
For the young men who pass the many challenges and tests of BUDS, it often leaves the greatest impression of their lives.
BUDS was a lot different than I expected.
My first impression of the BUDS compound was controlled chaos.
It was definitely a stress shock at first.
What we're trying to do in BUDS is test the spirit of the men so that we know that when somebody completes basic underwater demolition SEAL training, that they're not going to call timeout.
It's an adverse situation. It's very difficult from a physical and a mental standpoint. You're subjected to a lot of adversity. You come to learn certain fundamental truths that sound very obvious when you hear them said, but you come to really understand what these things mean. And they're very simple things like it's much better to be rested than it is to be tired. It's much better to be fed than it is to be hungry. Much better to be warm than cold. And it's much better to win than to lose.
SEALs are developed to win. It becomes subconscious. It becomes instinct. There is one thing all teammates share. All of them have suffered through 1 week together. 1 week that is often a blur, but never forgotten. Hell Week.
Hell Week is what we really all have in common.
You remember about the first 2.5 days of Hell Week, and after that it starts to become like a daydream. You know, your body can do 10 times more than your mind thinks it can do, and that's, I didn't believe it, but now I really do believe it.
Today, men from the top 1% of the SEAL community may be chosen to return to the Special Warfare Training Command in Coronado, California. After specialized training, they return to BUD/S as instructors.
I try to take Hell Week and compare it to a combat situation, because it's the only stressful situation that we get to put the individuals as a student through to see if they got what it takes to still be able to function in that situation.
Well, you'll see a lot of guys come to training and they'll look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then you'll see a guy standing next to him who you look at and go, what is this guy even doing here? You know, he doesn't look like anything. And yet 22 weeks later, the guy that looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger's long gone and you can't even remember who he was or his name. And there will be the other little guy standing there soaking wet, covered with mud and sand and salt water, wanting more.
The cold water is the most draining part, just simply because it taps as much as it possibly can out of you.
We're standing there, our class, and I am vibrating like you would picture a jackhammer. You know, you see those guys on the street, they're not even moving in comparison to how badly we're shaking.
Students' physical limits are tested constantly throughout training on what is known as the obstacle course.
These obstacle courses were made by the Seabees, and I think they took every Seabee that had was masochistic and had them build that obstacle course at Little Creek. It was terrible. It was awful.
For a tall guy like me, he'd run 9 to 10 minutes later on after he got good at it. First time I ran it was 43 minutes. And it was 43 minutes of pure hell.
To add further stress, during the 6 days of Hell Week, students are allowed only a total of 4 hours sleep.
You'll be exposed to pain and punishment and other little devices that we'll think of for one reason and one reason only: to make you the type of person we need to get the job done, no matter what the job is.
A given is physical capability, upper body strength, ability to swim great distances, ability to run great distances under all terms. Run, and run some more. Run in sand, run with boots on, run uphill, downhill, run carrying things, tons of running.
There were runs at BUD/S where I thought my heart was gonna come out of my mouth and I was just gonna turn inside out and die on the beach. But, you know, there was always something that got you through it.
No individual ever completes BUD/S alone. The trainees have fellow students, future teammates, and swim buddies to help them through it all.
No matter where you go or what you do, in the water, out of the water, that swim buddy is with you. He'll never leave you. You never, ever leave your swim buddy.
From day one in training, teamwork is emphasized. The teams also demand maximum effort from each individual operator.
Everything you do is for the betterment of the team. When you clean your equipment at the end of the day, you clean the class equipment, the squad equipment, swim buddy equipment, and then your own. You always come last. The individual always comes last.
The teams have always been voluntary. You volunteer in, you can volunteer out. Quitting is easy.
You could quit anytime you want to. All you had to do was say, I want out, and you was out without prejudice, and et cetera, and et cetera. But I never had any doubt in my mind that I wasn't going to become a UDT man. Just no doubt at all.
I think the time I wanted to quit, it was Vince Oliveira had a water hose down my throat, and I couldn't say I could quit because I couldn't speak because I was drowning, I think.
3 classes may be running at different stages of training at the same time during BUD/S. The different groups may taunt each other, but never when it matters.
The class ahead of us made more problems for us than the instructors. But while we were going through Hell Week, they would hang in there, guys, hoo-yah, guys, and they would leave candy bars underneath our pillow. And that touched me.
There's no way to put it. It was a family. I mean, we lived together, we died together, we loved, we cried. We did it all together.
You never forget these guys. That's why these phony SEALs that come around, you know, I was a SEAL. And who was in your class? Well, I can't remember. You remember that the rest of your life. And who was your commanding officer? You don't forget that stuff, you know.
The dropout rate during training could be as high as 80%. Only a proud few stand at graduation on that final day.
You know, I just want to be a frogman. Where, you know, put that frog on my shoulder. It was a high. It just felt so good to know I'd made it.
It was, first of all, a tremendous monkey off your back. You're there. You finally made it. You looked around and there's not many folks left compared to when the first view of the surrounding class was taken. But without question, to be with those people and to have suffered what you suffered with them bound us together. Even today, we're the very closest of friends.
Instructors, I mean, for 21 weeks, they've been trying to kill you, and then they put their arm around you and say, welcome aboard. And it's just amazing.
I felt special. I still feel special.
Hell Week is designed to simulate combat, but a unique few had a different Hell Week.
My Hell Week was June 6, 1944. June 6, 44, what is that? You ever hear of D-Day?
World War II, extending from September 1939 to August 1945, involved almost every nation on Earth. By early December 1941, the United States entered the war. The U.S. was soon faced for the first time in her history with fighting on two major fronts, in the Atlantic and Europe against the Axis, and in the Pacific and Asia against the Japanese Imperial Empire.
World War II was a war, and it was fought strategically. It was totally engaging all the military capabilities of this country and other countries, and it was an all-out war. It went from submarines to air.
Amphibious invasion soon became the way to open up a beachhead in enemy territory. To accomplish the invasions, the U.S. Navy established the Amphibious Force. To help the Amphibious Force, a number of specialty groups were created as the war progressed. 3 of these groups were the Scouts and Raiders, the Naval Combat Demolition Units, and later, the Underwater Demolition Teams. Landings in Africa and Italy were the beginning for the Atlantic theater of operation. The decision was made in May 1943 to open the Western Front in Europe by the summer of 1944. This would require the breaching of Hitler's Atlantic Wall, a stretch of fortifications, minefields, and obstacles lining much of Europe's coastline. Admiral Ernest J. King was the chief of naval operations for most of World War II. One of his tasks was to prepare the U.S. Navy for their part in Operation Neptune, the amphibious portion of Operation Overlord, the invasion of Europe. The German forces were constantly building emplacements, obstacles, and planting thousands of mines. To breach a hole through the obstacles and mines would take special demolition units that would work with explosives in the water and on the beach. These small teams would be the NCDUs, the Naval Combat Demolition Units, and their training would have to begin almost immediately. Lieutenant Commander Draper L. Kaufman was tasked by Admiral King to set up a training school for specialized Navy demolition units. Kaufman established the Naval Combat Demolition Unit Training School in Florida by early July 1943.
We started in Fort Pierce with a combination of instructors from the Scouts and Raiders, and I believe we had a couple of Rangers.
For his new school, Kaufman founded a tradition unique in the military. The officers would experience the exact same training as the enlisted men.
The officers had to do the same thing we did. And if they didn't do it, they disappeared. They were gone.
The isolated amphibious training base at Fort Pierce, Florida, already had the Navy's Scouts and Raiders training there. Kaufman had Scouts and Raiders instructors condense their rugged physical training program down to 1 week for his new unit. That week became the infamous Hell Week.
He was working under a very tight training schedule. Training for an NCDU class was only going to be 6 weeks long. The Scouts and Raiders had a 6-week training period. He took that physical training aspect, condensed it down, and created Hell Week. That's where it came from. It came from the Scouts and Raiders. Kaufman cooked it down and made it the first week of training.
5 men and 1 officer make up one NCDU, and they stay together during the entire training period. The men learned how to handle every kind of high explosive available and how to quickly blast a path through concrete, wood, or steel obstacles.
The NCDU mission was to clear the beaches so that the troops coming ashore could access the beach, and also to determine that they could exit the beach and get into the hinterland. They had to have access to the hinterland.
Some of the first NCDUs had been sent out to the Pacific to join in the operations against the Japanese Imperial Empire.
We were sent to the Southwest Pacific under the command of MacArthur. They called us MacArthur's Frogmen.
6 teams joined with MacArthur's forces in his island-hopping campaign. These 36 men operated as NCDUs until the end of the war. The majority of the NCDUs were sent to England to prepare for the invasion of Normandy. The NCDUs were joined with additional naval personnel and Army engineers to create Gap Assault Teams, or GATs. Each GAT was to blow a 50-yard wide channel through the obstacles at Normandy. The date was set, and the men made their final preparations for the greatest amphibious invasion in history. Early in the Pacific Campaign, Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner was in command of Operation Galvanic, the invasion of Tarawa Atoll. Information about the islands, and especially the waters on the reefs of the atoll, was hard to come by. The invasion was launched on November 19, 1943. Tracked vehicles that could grind their way across the coral reefs took the first Marines into the shore. The bulk of the forces came in on landing craft that ran aground on the offshore reefs. Heavily laden Marines had to wade into shore, often hundreds of yards away, with devastating results. At Tarawa, a reported 500 Marines drowned, just trying to reach the beach.
Tarawa had come and gone, and the high command saw that it was imperative that they have some better form of, it was basically hydrographic reconnaissance that was needed, because they had found out at Tarawa that they did not have any proper way to forecast tides.
To prevent a repeat of Tarawa, Admiral Turner directed a school be established to train special units in coral and man-made obstacle demolition. The new units would also conduct the reconnaissance of offshore waters just prior to any invasion. This would gather the latest information on the water's depth and discover any hidden obstacles. In December of 1943, Admiral Turner ordered the creation of 2 new teams. They were to be known as Underwater Demolition Teams, or UDTs. Personnel from the NCDUs, Marine Corps, and Army joined Seabees already undergoing training in Hawaii. UDTs 1 and 2 would soon prove to be one of the best ideas of the war.
There was a whole group of obstacles which the boats couldn't even get in there until somebody went in and took those obstacles out. And the frogmen were the ones that were sent in to do that.
Because the UDTs were required to operate in deeper water than the NCDUs, swimming would be necessary. First, UDT swimmers would go into target beaches and recon the waters. On a later demolition swim, the men would clear the obstacles. The UDTs were soon ordered to perform their missions in daylight, to be certain they didn't miss any obstacles and could clearly measure the water's depth. Seeing that the future of the NCDUs was going to be with the UDTs in Hawaii, Draper Kaufman arranged his own transfer to the Maui base. Assigned as the commanding officer of UDT-5, Kaufman was ordered to conduct a detailed hydrographic reconnaissance of the waters off Saipan for the upcoming invasion. Kaufman devised the string reconnaissance method for surveying the waters. UDT swimmers would use a lead-weighted line to measure the water's depth, The data and all obstacles seen were recorded on a plastic slate. The information would then be sent to a cartographer to make detailed charts.
When they came back to the ship, then the intelligence officer would interrogate each one of the swimmers, and they would deposit the slates with me, and then I would transfer that information over to charts that were used by the amphibious forces to make their landings, or to be used by our own group if we were going to go in and blast some obstacle or coral reef out of the path of the boats.
In the Atlantic, the most important mission the NCDUs were created for began. D-Day, June 6, 1944. At Normandy, NCDUs hit Omaha and Utah beaches without major infantry or tank support, clearing channels under heavy fire as more troops landed.
We got to the beach, Lieutenant Culver says, get the boat up on the beach and take cover. So there I was on this pebble beach, big rocks, digging a foxhole for myself and saying, Joe, you're 17 years old. What are you doing here? You were working in the shipyard, making $100 a week, and now you're gonna get killed.
We had 88s were hitting the beach alongside of us, and I remembered one hit fairly close to myself and one of the seamen that was with me, and I dove into that hole and waited there for a while, and this was towards the beach. And he says, well, what are we going to do now? And I said, well, we'll just wait here until another shell lands. And I said, then we'll move from here to that hole. And he says, why are you landing from hole to hole? And I said, they always told me, I said, when I was in training, that the bullets never hit the same hole again. So if you get in one that's been hit, you're in pretty safe grounds. So that's the way we worked ourselves up to the beach.
On the first day of the battle, 1,000 men were killed. On Utah Beach, 6 NCDU men were dead and 11 wounded. On Bloody Omaha, 31 NCDU men were killed and 60 wounded, over 50% of their units. In spite of the losses, the taking of Normandy would prove to be the major turning point in the fight against Hitler's fortress. The NCDUs made their indelible mark in the history of special warfare. As a direct result of the NCDU's successful part in the Normandy invasion, the fall of Germany was inevitable. The Navy's focus turned to the Pacific theater. With the island-hopping campaign so crucial, the decision was made to send all new NCDU graduates from Fort Pierce to Maui for further UDT training.
Commander Kaufman at the time said all you seamen can either go to a UDT team or go back to the fleet.
The UDT naked warrior operator of World War II swam into enemy beaches, often in plain sight, wearing little more than swim trunks, fins, and a diver's mask. They successfully conducted their operations armed with only a knife and a bag of explosives.
The only thing they were issuing at the time was a pair of coral shoes, a web belt, a K-bar knife, a face mask, and a pair of fins. But you had to qualify in your training, of course, to get the fins, swim the mile, and then get the fins. But the fins were even the synthetic rubber type of World War II. They wouldn't bend and they didn't give one way, and they got salt water soaked and they just disintegrated. And that's what we had to live with.
All the time I was in action and so forth, we loved it when we got in the water. That was where it was the safest place to be because you could duck and swim.
The underwater demolition teams and the operators in them led a relatively charmed life as long as they remained in the water.
As soon as I could get off the ship was not my blanket, the water was my blanket. As soon as I got in the water, everything was all right.
Due to the fact that the frogmen operated so near the enemy, a quick pickup method needed to be devised.
In UDT 25, I was a boat coxswain, and we were perfecting the pickup.
It was a hunt and peck system. We had one at first and had two big knots on the rope, and that didn't work out too good. We started first, of course, with the loop of the hands, and that wasn't too good. So we started with a knot on this rope, and they couldn't hold on to it, so we wove the loop into it and put it around one of the cross over on the boat, and that's what we used eventually then to pick up with.
The cast and recovery system was created.
It was a surefire almost system.
The UDTs did not work alone. They needed transport to and from the invasion site, and covering fire was sometimes required.
The support we got from the supporting ships was marvelous, because those destroyers, if we were getting any fire at all from the beach, those destroyers come in and they just lower those rifles down like this and they fire right over your head. You hear them whistling right by there, and the beach going up all over the place like that. It was great.
After the lessons learned by the Marines at Tarawa, UDTs were sent in first. This began a long-standing tradition.
We had no qualms against the Marines, although we'd leave them assigned now and then.
The Marines took it in good humor, and their respect for the UDT skyrocketed. There was a long-time statement by the Marine Corps, "We are the first on the beach." Well, after that it was, "You are first on the beach right behind the UDT."
In August 1945, the war in Europe had ended. Hitler's Germany and the Thousand-Year Reich were destroyed. In the Pacific, the conflict continued to rage. Japanese resistance increased as the Allies closed in on the Mother Islands.
We were training for the invasion of Japan, the final invasion.
Operation Olympic was to take place on November 1st, 1945. Operation Coronet, which would capture Tokyo, was planned for March 1st, 1946. The invasions would not be necessary. World War II ended unlike any other war in mankind's history. On August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., the Enola Gay flew over the city of Hiroshima.
I'd already been through one invasion. I'm glad that President Truman says, "Let's end this."
3 days later, Nagasaki received the second atomic bomb. The Japanese surrendered. Before the U.S. forces arrived to accept the formal surrender of Japan, the UDTs went in to clear the way.
As every other amphibious invasion since Guadalcanal and Tarawa, the UDT led the way in.
It was a little hectic at first. We were a little apprehensive about it. We didn't know whether the war was over or not. I think that's why they sent us in, really.
Well, our role as UDT 21 to go over to Japan was to try to make it safe for the troops to land. But when we got over there and started landing along the coast of the main island of Japan, we discovered that there were literally dozens, if not hundreds, of caves, and in these caves were hundreds of suicide boats. There were also midget submarines, and our job was to get rid of those suicide boats. And when I think about it, we were going up and down there trying to burn them, and after a while we had to take the suicide boats out into the water and put axes to them. But when I think about what would have happened if the bombs had not dropped and we had to invade Japan, and all of our troops would be exposed to the suicide boats, the midget subs, and others, it would have been catastrophic.
World War II ended on September 2nd, 1945. U.S. casualties during the war included over 400,000 dead and almost 700,000 wounded. Out of the approximately 3,500 men of the World War II UDTs and NCDUs, 148 soldiers were wounded, and an estimated 83 lost their lives.
I look back on it and think that the price we paid was high, but the results and the returns were also high because we were able to, I think, when I say we, I mean collectively we, the American military force, including the frogmen, were able to be a deterrent force to the black plague of Nazism, fascism, communism, and Japanese imperialism.
And there was a comment made that something by one of the, I don't remember which one of the fleet admirals it was, about the most unruly bunch of goddamn Navy men that he ever seen in his life, and he didn't know what to do with them. But Kaufman come back and said, but they got the job done. And the admiral says, yeah, I hate to admit it, but they did.
Like the rest of the military, the underwater demolition teams were cut back in size after World War II. Amphibious invasions and the swimmers needed to lead them in seemed obsolete in the age of atomic weapons. From a wartime high of 3,500 men, the number of post-war UDTs shrank dramatically. By 1948, the 4 existing UDTs had a complement of only 7 officers and 45 enlisted men each. As the post-war commander of UDT-2, Lieutenant Commander Douglas Fain could see the necessity of taking the UDTs fully underwater. To enlarge their capabilities, Fain brought operational underwater breathing equipment to the teams in the late 1940s. Though some equipment had been introduced to the teams during World War II, Fain could see the UDTs conducting whole operations underwater without surfacing with the new equipment.
The way to approach an enemy beach, if you are not to be seen, is to go underwater. So we trained our men to swim underwater for long distances, sometimes with a lung. It wasn't an aqualung, it was a oxygen breathing apparatus. And we were able to reach the beach without being seen. And that kept us from being killed. So it was a very simple reason. It just opened a new door of what could be done by swimmers.
Bringing in diving gear from abroad, Fain had his UDT operators locking in and out of submarines while underway. But he himself was continuously experimenting with new methods.
He decided it might be a good move if we can go out the torpedo tubes. You work your way into that greasy tube, but they had no way of controlling the air pressure to eliminate the water, equalize the pressure with the inside of the boat so you can come in. They'd hit that thing that would fire the torpedo, and that dumped the air in a hurry. And when we opened the door, Doug Fain was there. He comes out of there, he's bleeding from the eyes, ears, mouth, and he says, I don't think that's going to work too well.
I think Doug Fain, had it not been for him, there might not have been a UDT after the war, because everything just went decimated. And then Korea rolled around, and all of a sudden we're in it again.
Suddenly, on June 25, 1950, the People's Army of North Korea surged across the 38th parallel. The democratic government of South Korea staggered and almost fell. Quick action by the United States and UN forces slowed and finally stopped the North Korean advance. The free world now found itself in a direct confrontation with the Communist East. A new generation of UDTs would be tested in a way they had never been tested before. The Korean War would expose the UDTs for the first time to guerrilla warfare. Although unprepared, the tenacious frogmen would once again rise to the occasion.
The day it started, as I recall it, was the 25th of June, 1950. And that was the day that the North Koreans made what turned out to be their big mistake and crossed the parallel in big force and very quickly took Seoul, the capital of South Korea, and the historic capital of Korea itself, and proceeded to take just about all the rest of the peninsula.
This was a front lines war. Trenches, mud, frozen dirt, fighting back and forth. They captured hill after hill and lost hill after hill.
The ground war would be similar to the World War II aspect. I mean, this was, on a line type firing, and it wasn't a jungle. Vietnam, of course, was like a jungle war, sneaking around the bushes, skirmishing here and there, and surprising the enemy, ambushing. This was not the case in Korea. In Korea, you lined up, abreast these people, put the tanks out in front of you, and go get them. Infantry.
It was going to take amphibious operations to get defenders and their equipment into South Korea quickly enough to stop the North Koreans. A small detachment of UDT operators were working in Japan when the conflict broke out. Within days of the communist assault, they were performing reconnaissance operations in Korean waters.
Korea, there was a great loss of life, a lot of hardship. Korea was an ice-cold country in the winter. It was miserable for most of the armed forces.
As the best Navy demolition experts available, the UDTs quickly found themselves in a new environment early in the Korean conflict. UDT operators were tasked with going in on dry land behind enemy lines and cutting vital railway and road systems. Slipping in from the sea, UDT commandos attacked bridges and railways that were close to the water. The missions were new, and the UDTs had a lot to learn.
It was obvious from Korea that we'd all been trained for World War II, and World War II was done. There weren't going to be any big amphibious invasions like World War II, with like Normandy, with beach obstacles and reefs and things like that. And they saw that the UDT had a lot of potential. The demolition, the swimming, the gung-ho spirit, and all of that sort of thing. But to make them really useful, they had to broaden their capability and make them into a commando.
We were a poor outfit at that time. And I, for one, was running around those hills in Korea, a long way from the water, and had an old pair of boots on with about half the sole missing off it, big toe hanging out, had that shoe wrapped up with tape, and tried to keep the snow and water out of there. Now you could line up a platoon of UDT sailors at that time, and there would be no two people dressed the same way. You'd have a Marine hat on, Army pair of boots, maybe you'd have an Air Force flight jacket or something, and that's the way we dressed, because this is where our clothing came from. We would go to these bases and see what they had that we could bum, beg, borrow, or steal. And we'd make trades with them. We'd offer them all the fish and lobster they could eat if they'd give us this stuff. See? And most of them were more than happy to give us what we needed.
UDTs worked with the U.S. intelligence services since World War II. As a result of this, the UDTs were among the first men asked by the CIA to help in guerrilla and rescue operations in North Korea. Men from the UDTs instructed Koreans in operations from rubber boats, demolitions, small arms, and the recovery of downed American and UN pilots.
You had air war up there and those dogfights were going on. That was probably the last era of dogfighting. Today they don't dogfight. They fire a missile at a target they don't even see. But then you would stand by and you could see a plane out there eject the canopy, and pretty soon a pilot would come out of it, and you would make every effort to get to him before the North Koreans did.
The end of the Korean War was not the end of a war as we had seen it before. There was no formal surrender. There was an agreement at Panmunjom to cease fire. There was a truce declared. That truce still exists to this day.
Korea was a disastrous war.
All combatants in Korea signed a ceasefire on July 27, 1953. Over 54,000 U.S. servicemen were killed, and over 100,000 wounded during the course of the conflict. The Korean War proved to be a vital step in the evolution of the teams. After the Korean conflict, the UDTs began expanding their capabilities rapidly. Their unconventional style became their trademark.
Innovation was our life's blood.
In the years before and after the Korean War, the UDTs were not only expanding their abilities, they were extending the range of areas in which they could operate. With the necessity of building a distant early warning system to detect incoming nuclear missiles, construction had to be done near and above the Arctic Circle. To bring in ships and materials for this building project, landing sites had to be found, examined, and blasted clear. With new protective suits against the cold, UDT swimmers were operating around and under the Arctic ice cap. The waters were so frigid they would kill an unprotected swimmer in minutes.
We're always trying to improve our capability, both our individual capability, our team capability. We had a job to do, and the jobs were never easy.
To extend the range of their underwater operations and the amount of material they could transport, the UDTs began adopting SPUs, or swimmer propulsion units. The SPUs increased in size and capabilities over time. Today, the teams have miniature free-floating submarines, or SDVs. These SEAL delivery vehicles can carry a group of swimmers for miles underwater, launching from and returning to a submerged parent submarine. Some UDT targets could not be approached by a ship or submarine to within a reasonable striking distance. For those times, the UDT took to another element, the air.
We'd jump out of helicopters without chutes, 75, 80 feet in the air, and that was our way to jump. You want to get back in the helicopter, they have that trail out there, a Jacob's ladder, and you crawled up that thing. And this is long before the qualification for jumping came in.
By the mid to late 1950s, UDT operators were attending the U.S. Army Jump School at Fort Benning and becoming qualified paratroopers. UDT operators experimented with techniques of parachuting into the water to begin a mission. Tactical enhancement became a part of the UDT's way of life, always stressing the equipment and finding new ways to improve their efficiency.
Frogmen being what they are, there was a lot of unique things done to parachutes that were, I would say, outside the legal parameters. We were able to modify as we saw fit, and there were a lot of that going on, and developed some pretty good parachutes out of it. We would hold the rips in the canopies. We'd use duct tape. I mean, parachutes are loaded with duct tape, and people had cut holes in them, and it was pretty wild.
Men from the UDTs and the SEALs have been involved with the U.S. space program since its earliest days. When NASA first wanted to know just how much punishment the human body could take, they used volunteers from the UDTs.
They selected 12 individuals and transferred us up to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and doing just as many tests as they possibly could do. For example, sitting in a heat chamber, 140 degrees for 3 hours to see what your reaction to heat would be and what your stability would be like and whether you became antsy and so on and so forth, the things that exposure to heat would have on the human mind and body.
Frogmen's involvement in the space program continued by establishing the Space Capsule Recovery Program.
Going back to the earliest parts of the space program, we lost a Mercury capsule in 1961 when Gus Grissom was recovered after his flight. And after that, NASA decided that we needed frogmen to jump out and put flotation collars around spacecraft. And all the way through the Apollo missions to the moon, UDT people were parachuted out and they met the capsule in the water and provided flotation for it.
No matter what the mission, the teams would answer the call. In World War II, the NCDUs blasted open the beaches of Europe. The UDTs utilized demolitions and scouted the Pacific against the Japanese Imperial Empire. Guerrilla warfare training and unconventional operations had been conducted by the Scouts and Raiders in China. In Korea, the UDTs operated on land and helped take the war behind enemy lines. In the 1960s, a new threat emerged, and a new warrior was needed. In the early 1960s, the U.S. and the free world were facing a new kind of war, the Cold War.
It was around, I'd say, the latter part of '61 that this little bit of rumors started coming out about this new formation of a SEAL team or something of that nature. We didn't know what it was about.
Early in 1961, Soviet Union Premier Nikita Khrushchev stated plainly to the world that his government would support just wars of liberation and revolution. This occurred a few weeks before the U.S. inaugurated a new president. At 43, John F. Kennedy was the youngest man to be elected president. In spite of his youth, Kennedy had already been baptized in the fire of war. During World War II, Lieutenant John Kennedy commanded a PT boat in the Pacific.
He believed that, one, the wars of the future were not going to be Patton's tanks going over the mountains, the desert. They were going to be fought in the jungles, and they were going to be fought in the streets. They weren't going to be fought there, and we should be prepared to do this. And he looked around the world, and we didn't have anybody to do that. We didn't have a commando force. And basically, early, that was what the SEALs, I think, as he saw them. And he saw a small, tight-knit unit that could strike fast. His background, PT boats. He knew that. He loved that. He felt that.
The Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Arleigh Burke, had been considering the creation of just such a group of men in the Navy since 1958. By the middle of 1960, Admiral Burke was directing officers in the Navy to actively investigate possible Navy unconventional warfare units. Within a short time, the investigation centered on increasing the capabilities of the UDTs.
They said, we've got to do it quick. We don't have time to retrain, redo this. What's the quickest way? God, we've got UDT, whose mission has been going down. We're not doing amphibious landings. We've got all these guys are highly trained. We've got equipment, and they're doing something that we really don't need anymore. So why not take this, turn it around? It gives us a head start. We'll educate them, and these will be our experts in special warfare. It made sense.
With the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion in April, President Kennedy ordered all of the services to increase their unconventional warfare capability.
I am directing the Secretary of Defense to expand rapidly and substantially, in cooperation with our allies, the orientation of existing forces for the conduct of non-nuclear war, paramilitary operations, and sublimited or unconventional wars.
Admiral Burke moved ahead, directing that the SEAL teams, one on each coast, be created. Lieutenant Commander William Hamilton on the East Coast was both the commander of UDT-21 and also in charge of the UDT operations for the Atlantic Fleet. By August 1961, Hamilton was assigned to the Pentagon and directed to put together the new units. On the East Coast, Lieutenant Roy Boehm of UDT-21 was directed to obtain the equipment, arrange the training, and choose the men.
The way the SEALs started, it was Lieutenant Commander Bill Hamilton.
Well, when President Kennedy made his speech recommending that the armed forces have better paramilitary capability, I was commanding officer of Underwater Demolition Team 21, and we were stationed in St. Thomas, in the Virgin Islands. And I heard that the speech had happened, and it occurred to me that this was precisely what Commander Fain and I had been talking about for years before.
He ordered me to give him a commando outfit, a group of men that would go any place, anytime, anywhere, and do anything. I asked Commander Hamilton, give me a line of guidance. And he said, when you're called upon to do anything and you're not ready to do it, then you've failed. That's pretty wide scope.
If you got a problem and you can't solve it easily, you go to Boehm and he'll solve it for you.
We had missions that had to be performed. We had equipment that wouldn't do the job. And the only way that I could get the attention and get the equipment and make sure that my people had a round trip was to turn up the heat.
Roy got up there, he says, the following named personnel fall out and fall in the briefing room. And we're looking around and here's these limos pulling up, people with attaché cases and everything going into the building, and they were setting security around it. What did we do this time? Yeah. So they start calling the names, Tullison, Kaczynski, Hoot, Watson, and we're looking. We're all diver qualified, and every one of us were airborne. And we're all mixed gas, closed circuit. We all had the same qualifications. So we're watching this and, oh boy, this is it. We got picked.
They used to say, Roy, go get your mob. I'd say, Admiral, I don't have a mob, I have a team.
By mid-December 1961, the final orders were signed. Effective January 1st, 1962, SEAL Team 1 on the West Coast and SEAL Team 2 on the East Coast were commissioned. Each new SEAL team consisted of 10 officers and 50 enlisted men.
I called the team together when I was getting ready during the missile crisis. And I asked them, I said, asked the whole team, I said, I would like 15 volunteers. And the whole team stepped forward.
Everybody in the damn team wanted to go with him. They didn't care where he was going or what he was going to do. If he's going and he's the boss, we want to go with him.
What do you say to a gang like that except I'm in charge of the dumbest bunch of people I've ever met in my entire life. And I already had their names because I had a hunch that they'd all step forward, and they all did.
Now, the SEAL teams were a reality. Their development would continue But opportunities for their direct use would be few. Both SEAL teams were held on alert during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1963, and again during the Dominican Republic crisis in 1965. But all of it would just be preparation for the SEALs' true trial by combat in the rivers, canals, and swamps of a tiny country in Southeast Asia known as Vietnam.
Vietnam was unique because it was all jungle and wetlands and rice paddies, and you couldn't tell who was who. There were no battle lines. In Europe, you had a battle line. In the Pacific, it was an island. In Vietnam, the enemy could be in front of you, in back of you. You'd have to get out there in the bushes and fight them, their kind of fight.
We operated like the Vietnamese did, like the Viet Cong did. They went out at night and they'd ambush you and do this, and we went in his backyard and did the same thing to him, where he was afraid of us. We were the aggressor. Instead of sitting back and letting him come to us, we went to him. Every night in Vietnam was scary. 90% of the time we did it at night, you know, but every night you went out, you were scared. I mean, you know, you're excited, but scared. I was.
The Vietnam War would prove to be the major evolutionary event in the development of the Navy SEALs. When direct action SEAL platoons began arriving in Vietnam in 1966, they immediately started operating aggressively in order to take the war to the Viet Cong. Through areas considered impassable, the SEALs would hunt the VC where they felt the safest. The days of Hell Week were remembered when SEAL squads slid through hundreds of yards of mud in order to surprise a VC base. When VC would be on the move to prepare an ambush, they would suddenly find themselves ambushed. The SEALs were unlike any kind of soldiers the Vietnamese had ever seen. Due to their camouflage makeup and the way they operated in the dark, the VC simply called the SEALs the devils in green faces.
We looked like something that was very unnatural and something that they weren't used to seeing. So I think that had a psychological effect on them, and that was part of our role too. If we had a better psychological or a more psychological effect on them, it just helped us to perform our mission better.
It was a guerrilla warfare. It was animalistic. It was a different kind of war, a different kind of enemy.
As the Frogmen did in World War II and Korea, the SEALs adapted to the harshness of the war in Vietnam.
I knew it was going to be miserable. That's why I raised my hand. That's why I wanted to do it. I knew I could do it. I knew that the people with me could do it. Okay, this is the environment. These are the conditions. This is the job. Let's go do that. We wanted to do that.
This is it. This is what we trained for.
The U.S. conventional forces could not come to grips with an unconventional enemy. Traditional tactics of fire and maneuver could not be used effectively against a guerrilla force.
The Army and other units said it couldn't be done, that nobody could control the Delta, that Charlie owned it. Well, we proved them wrong. We took their game and turned it around on them.
Whenever we initiated our ambushes, we opened up with everything.
When we opened up, it looked like the whole world opened up. I had no idea till we actually did our first ambush how much firepower we had.
I used to carry about anywhere from 12 to 1,800 rounds.
From silent observation posts, the SEALs would track the flow of enemy troops and equipment. The smaller groups of VC the SEALs attacked from ambush. Where the Viet Cong had formerly been able to move almost at will during the night, they soon came to fear the sudden rain of steel and explosives from SEAL units hidden in the brush. The night no longer belonged to the Viet Cong.
the reason they call it special warfare, because it's special. The minute you start being conventional in thinking and conventional in anything, you're no longer special, and there's no reason to have you.
I think they had, especially as we saw in Vietnam, they had more of their destiny within their control. The young platoon officers were completely and almost totally in charge of the operation. If they ran across something that was not in the original plan or the original warrant or patrol order, they had the option of making that decision right there in the field to go ahead and take care of this. Hey, this is a bigger and better deal, let's do it. So they had their destiny in their hands.
Soon after going into direct combat in Vietnam, the SEALs learned that they had to fight smarter than their enemy, not just harder. The idea of a large body count was soon changed to the more important one of targeting leaders. SEALs learned to develop their own intelligence gathering network. Adding their own information to that which they received from the command, the SEALs went after larger units of men or individual high-ranking VC officers and officials. The rule quickly became, you can't get information from a dead man. Already masters of the sudden ambush, the SEALs now became green-painted shadows in the night that snatched VC up from their own beds. The SEALs were so effective, bounties were placed on their heads.
It was $10,000, $15,000 on all our heads, just dead or alive, and just prove your green face. Because you know what that tells me? You're really pissing them off.
My first platoon was spent 180 days and run 101 combat operations, and 68. And this platoon spent 180 days and run 71 combat operations. Both of them had over 80% contact. But we learned a little more, and we went strictly after VCI, the infrastructure, and by that time they always told us in all of our training, and we told all of our men and trained all of our men that dead men don't talk. So we would try every way we could to capture. But during TED of 68, we didn't know how bad we had hurt the VC.
Where we were operating in the Rung Sat Special Zone, prisoners were valuable. So we always, if there's two words that I'll never forget in my life, it's dung lai, which is stop, and lie day, which is come here. And that's the two words we always said, of course, unless they were pointing a gun at us. More often than not, of course, they were terrified looking up and seeing 7 people with face paint on, or if they could see us, we were pretty well camouflaged.
The SEALs did the majority of special operations for the Navy in Vietnam. The UDTs still had their share of missions to perform in Southeast Asia. UDT detachments were among the first Navy units in Vietnam and did reconnaissance and demolition missions throughout the war.
Our main job, our main function when we were in Vietnam, we did some river patrols, we did some river recons, basically river stuff.
The SEALs could not have been as successful as they were in Vietnam without help. Support for SEAL operations came from many sources, including Army artillery, Air Force close-in air support, and naval gunfire from offshore ships. 2 units stand out for their close cooperation with the SEALs: the Brownwater Navy and the Seawolf helicopter gunships. Operating with the SEALs, these 2 units completed the triad of naval special warfare in Vietnam.
You're a SEAL, but there's no red S on your chest. Without the boats to come get you or bring you in, and more importantly, coming to get you when you get more than you can handle, or without the helicopter or the air support, you ain't nothing.
The Brownwater Navy was made up of a number of small craft that traveled the waterways of the Mekong Delta. The most popular with the teams were the 31-foot fiberglass-hulled river patrol boats, or PBRs. These small boats could turn within their own length, move in shallow waters, and carried firepower far out of proportion to their own size. The PBRs would take SEALs in quietly to a target, pull them out rapidly in case of trouble, and come in close with their guns blazing when called on. Using armed helicopter gunships from the U.S. Army, manned with Navy crews and pilots, the men of Helicopter Attack Squadron Light 3, or HAL 3, made their nickname, the Sea Wolves, a legend in the skies of Vietnam. Seawolf gunships would operate in close support of SEALs on the ground. So close in some situations that the SEALs would have to duck out of the way of hot machine gun brass raining down on them. If SEALs were in trouble, the Sea Wolves came in.
You won't find a SEAL who was in Vietnam and won't say that those guys did not bail our bacon out any number of times in Vietnam. We went places, did things that we wouldn't have dreamed of doing just because we knew that they would be there if we needed them.
Probably the thing that stood out in my mind mostly was how much we grew as a team.
And it got to the point where even in the dark you could recognize one of your team members. You knew who it was, you knew what he was doing, you knew after training with all the time that you were trained with him, you knew how he was going to react to something. You knew that if somebody started shooting at you, he was going to jump to the right or he was going to jump to the left, and how he was going to move, what he was going to do when he actually did it.
My level of confidence is so high that I thought I was a neurosurgeon and I thought all these guys were Superman. There's nothing I wouldn't do to try and save a life, and there's nothing I was ever scared of when I had my other guys around me.
Let me give you a definition of pain. We're out there on this particular operation where I received my Purple Heart and I got shot in the hand. We'd all been to the movies. Remember John Wayne, Green Beret? Okay, I can do that. John Wayne, any of his cowboy movies. There he is, he's got this arrow sticking out of his chest, right? What does he do? Pulls it right out of his chest, right? And goes on and kills the rest of the Indians. I said, I can do that. I looked down at my hand, kind of looked like some bloody hamburger down there, but I saw the bullet sticking out of the back of my hand. Piece of cake. John Wayne did it. You just take it, you grab that bullet between your teeth, and you just pull it right out of your hand. Minor complication. My vision wasn't what it could have been. That was not a bullet. That was a bone sticking out of the back of my hand. Unfortunately, it was still attached. So I grabbed, I pulled, my toes curled. And I said to myself, I'll worry about that later.
SEALs and UDTs never performed in action expecting an award or medal. Even so, the teams collected a very impressive number of decorations during the Vietnam War. Combat awards for the SEALs and naval special warfare in Vietnam include several hundred Purple Hearts, 3 Presidential Unit citations, 2 Legions of Merit, 402 Bronze Stars, 42 Silver Stars, 8 Navy Crosses, and 3 Medals of Honor.
I have mixed emotions about things like that. Of course, you're very proud. You're very proud when somebody hangs a medal on you. That wasn't the first one somebody hung on me, but you also have mixed emotions between pride and humility. I don't know of any medal that anybody could give anyone that somebody else hasn't done more or lost their life for. And as I think about it, I think about those guys up there in the sky, and I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for I got the Navy Cross.
I know when I went to, they called me up and said, Mike, you've been put in for the Congressional Medal of Honor. I said, that's a bunch of BS. I said, no, you really have been. And I said, oh yeah, I just kind of blew it off. And next thing I know, that was October 31st, Halloween night. October the 15th, that next year, I was set in the White House receiving the medal. Tommy was still in the hospital at Bethesda. They wouldn't let him go, so I went out and kidnapped him. Took him to the White House with me, and the greatest honor I ever had was when they put that medal around my neck, was looking back and had him right here on my shoulder. And like I said, that medal was half his too. And it belongs to all men and women who's ever supported our country. It doesn't belong to Mike Thornton.
In the 7 years of direct U.S. combat actions in Vietnam, 58,214 U.S. servicemen lost their lives, with over 300,000 wounded. Naval special warfare losses during the war include 1 man from UDT 12, 3 from UDT 13, 9 from SEAL Team 2, and 34 men from SEAL Team 1. But for every SEAL or UDT operator killed, estimates give 200 enemy losses. In the years since the Vietnam War, arguments continue about the U.S. involvement in Southeast Asia. But one point is never argued. The capabilities and actions of naval special warfare in Vietnam are not questioned. Even in Vietnam today, it is considered that the SEALs won their part of that war.
I think that Vietnam was the crucible in which naval special warfare was modern naval special warfare. The SEALs were formed, and we owe an extraordinary debt of gratitude to those guys from Vietnam.
Cutbacks after Vietnam were extreme for all military forces, including naval special warfare.
There was an anti-military sentiment during the 70s, and I think a lot of military, some of our senior officers at the time were a little gun-shy as well over the beating they were taking in the press and maybe from some of the politicians. So there was a sort of just back off and let things happen attitude as I remember it. The other thing that strikes me is that the good funding that we enjoyed for the time we operated in Vietnam dried up quickly.
The large wartime SEAL teams had to be reduced in size. Men from the teams were allowed to retire or simply shifted back to the fleet. With funds for materials and training limited, the self-motivated teams had to take matters into their own hands.
The notion after Vietnam was sort of put them back in their cages till the next war. Well, of course, our guys weren't going to put up with that, and we did what we had to keep the commands going. And when I had SEAL Team 2 from 1972 to 74, we were so short of money, troops were again paying their own way to get training done because everybody knew they had to keep their qualifications up, but we didn't have any money to send them off to schools and so forth, so the guys would spend their own money to go. I just think the guys had too much pride to throw up their hands and quit. That's about the bottom line. We knew that what we could offer the country and the military was something else no one else could, something no other unit could do it.
In the mid-1960s, the SEALs were entrusted and trained on the most powerful demolition weapon system available, the small atomic demolition munition, the backpack A-bomb.
It was called the SATM. It was a nuclear weapon. And it was a nuclear weapon that could be delivered by a couple of people to an objective area, either submerged, during swim the device into a target area. You could parachute it in. Then when you got to the area, both individuals were trained on the setting up of the device, and then you'd exfiltrate, and we would have a nuclear explosion.
In the 1970s, a new and vicious form of warfare began spreading: terrorism.
In the later part of the 70s, both coasts, for the maritime function, had to have a team to answer to any crisis situation.
A new SEAL team was created to deal with terrorism at sea or near the water. In November 1980, the very secret SEAL Team 6 was born.
My squad was a wild bunch in terms of being ultra aggressive, ultra confident, and didn't really need, we weren't worried about self-starting. They were self-containing maybe.
Dick, Marcinko was tasked with something given from the CNO to form because of the new threat in the world.
Marcinko was tasked with a job that not too many people in the world probably could accomplish. He took a group of Navy SEALs and turned them into one of the most elite counter-terrorist organizations in the world in a matter of a year. Our first year of training, we had 2 days off. It was Christmas Day and Thanksgiving Day. The rest of the time, we were training 14, 16 hours a day.
Team 6 redefined unconventional warfare. Not only did they bend the rules, they rewrote the rule book.
At SEAL Team 6, we really developed our insertion and extraction skills. We learned new skills, room entries, if you will. Actually, we developed these skills. Nobody really knew how to do it, and we just went in with both feet and just started learning it from scratch. We pushed the edge of the envelope on everything.
Although the existence of SEAL Team 6 is known, their mission is still highly classified.
I went out and got the best guys and bought the best toys. And at that time, terrorism was the best mission.
To streamline forces, it was decided in 1983 to merge the missions of the UDTs and the SEALs. The long history of the underwater demolition teams had finally come to an end. But their traditions continued in the SEALs.
It was somewhat of a sad moment of UDT going away.
It was the guys from World War II and from Korea, the history that actually got us the SEAL teams. And there was a tremendous sense of that we were losing something when we changed from the UDTs to the SEAL teams.
UDT's primary job was water. Their secondary job was land. SEAL team's primary job was land. Their secondary job was water. It was a great thing when we became SEAL team, but it was like a loss of you lost something.
It was very difficult to say goodbye to that past because for those of us who were in UDT, even to this day, we still pretty much refer to ourselves as frogmen.
The SEAL teams were now complete. The knowledge gained from the veterans of 3 major conflicts was augmented into the new teams. The 80s and 90s would prove to be an unsettling time for the world. The SEAL teams would once again be put to the test. On October 25, 1983, President Ronald Reagan told the world that the United States had begun Operation Urgent Fury, the invasion of the island of Grenada. Increasing threats from communist-backed forces on Grenada against nearly 1,000 U.S. citizens there forced the U.S. to act. During preparations for the operation, 4 SEALs lost their lives in the seas off Grenada during a parachute insertion. These were the first SEAL losses in combat since the Vietnam War. During the operation, SEALs from Team 6 landed at Governor General Schoon's mansion. Their objective was to secure the safety of both the Governor General and his people.
State Department and everybody else have been telling us that this will be a cakewalk. The Grenadians had no military, which they really didn't to speak of. And everybody underestimated the role of the Cubans down there. In fact, I had a State Department gent look me in the eye and tell me that the Cubans will be in their barracks during this mission. And had not been so sleep deprived at the time, I probably would have said, how do you know?
I will never forget one thing. Being my first actual combat mission, I'll never forget him walking into the room and we were getting our intel dump, and he held up a blank sheet of paper, so that was our intel.
What I was told was there was 4 BTR-60s, which is an armored vehicle. I believe it's got a 51 caliber machine gun on it, on the island. And it was basically just Grenadian troops that had been trained by the Cubans.
We a little bit late going in. We're supposed to go in right at sunrise, and we ended up going early in the morning, broad daylight. Whether they're tipped off or not, it doesn't matter. Coming across the islands, we took anti-aircraft fire.
When I got there, we had 4 BTR-60s at the front door. We had 2 on one side of the driveway and 2 on the other. I'm going, my God, I've got all 4 of them right here. Then I watch all these trucks go up and down Luke Street, and I said, these guys might be a little more organized than we thought.
And I remember looking in the helo, and we already had probably 3 more bodies than we're supposed to. But I'm looking at some Vietnam vets, and I was kicking the rope, number 1, and I had my partner, Rich, with me, with his hand and elbow on the rail that comes out with the fast rope. And looking at these Vietnam vets smiling at us, saying, how's it feel to be shot at?
Me and the older guys, Bobby Lewis, Timmy Prusak, Johnny Johnson, we're just bored, just want to get off this thing. Everybody else is just eyeballs. We got in there, we still hadn't heard from anybody. I mean, things look grim. We've got 4 of these BTR-60s here. We're totally surrounded. We're only supposed to be there for 45 minutes. I haven't seen hide nor hair of Bob Gormley. Well, come to find out he's been shot out of the sky. Yeah, things were looking a little grim.
From the headquarters there inside the building, they called and they had to walk in 40 millimeters gunfire close to position, take care of the threat that was online assault.
I'm sweating bullets. Wally Stevens is on the phone. Man, I start chewing him out. What's going on, Wally? He tells me it's not pretty down here at this end. I said, well, you ought to see it at this end.
The military supports the SEALs with funding, equipment, and trust in the defense of a democratic world. But one group is often overlooked in the continuing and unwavering support they provide these special soldiers.
The girls we leave behind are pretty special people. And some of the marriages don't work out, and some of them do. And for those that do, we devote our life to SEAL team. We become a SEAL, everything. Even when we're home, we're not at home. They go to the Little League games, and they're the Cub Scout, take care of the Cub Scouts. They do all those things. They raise our children. And then we're gone from home, and they don't hear from us, and all these things happen. I've been married 43 years, and my youngest son was in the 82nd Airborne, and he called me one day and says, hey, Dad, you know, something big's going to happen, but I can't tell you about it, but you won't hear from me for a while. I said, oh, yeah, son, keep your head down. And the next morning, the 82nd jumped in on a Grenada, and I was a vegetable. But I saw the strength of my wife during that. And so, a Navy wife, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of SEAL wives. They're still there. And a Navy wife that is a pretty important person to that guy that comes home with a big watch on his arm and a bag of dirty clothes and a few other things, and then leaves again.
By the mid-1980s, the need for a united command for all Special Operation Forces was essential to coordinate their use. Special Operation groups from the Army, Air Force, and Navy would all be under the SOCOM command.
They put a four-star Army general in charge, and he interviewed Army, Navy, and Air Force people, you know, to be his senior enlisted advisor. And I was the Navy person that they put up as a SEAL. Overnight, I was in charge of the SEALs, the Special Forces, the Rangers, the 23rd Air Force, approximately 45,000 enlisted men.
A state of war existed between Iraq and its neighbor Iran during most of the 1980s. The war extended into the Persian Gulf, where both countries tried to cut off the other's oil revenues. The U.S. sent naval forces, including SEAL units, into the Persian Gulf area. SEAL combat swimmers, approaching objects in the water, identified floating anti-ship mines. On September 21, 1987, the Iran Ajir was caught in the act of planting mines in the Gulf waters. The ship was taken under fire and surrendered. SEALs boarded the craft, capturing it with mines still aboard. Smaller Iranian gunboats also threatened shipping in international waters. These craft quickly became targets for the SEALs and their helicopter gunship support. Iranian oil platforms used to target shipping in the Gulf came under assault by detachments from SEAL Team 4. In August 1988, after the Iraq-Iran war had ended, a permanent SEAL detachment was established in Bahrain to maintain a watch on Persian Gulf waters. In 1989, General Manuel Noriega overturned the results of a national election in Panama, effectively making himself the military dictator of the country. The year before, Noriega's involvement with drug trafficking caused him to be indicted in U.S. courts. Within a few days, a U.S. officer was killed by Panamanian troops, and another seized along with his wife. 35,000 troops and U.S. citizens were in Panama, and their safety could no longer be guaranteed. On December 20th, 1989, President Bush ordered Operation Just Cause, the invasion of Panama, to begin.
Panama was actually a joint service, joint command operation. And what we're trying to do, everybody knows, we're going in just trying to pull Noriega out of power.
Task Force White for Operation Just Cause was made up of operators from SEAL Teams 2 and 4. White had several objectives during the opening hours of Just Cause. The missions included searching for Noriega at his Special Operations Headquarters, disabling Noriega's private jet, and stopping the possible use of several fast patrol boats for Noriega's escape. For this mission, SEAL swimmer pairs moved out underwater and planted demolition charges at the stern of the targeted boats.
Got to where the boat was, and the reason we could tell was just a nice big old shadow on our right side where the boat was parked, butt end against the pier. Immediately went underneath it. Chris got all the way underneath the boat. I stuck one hand underneath the boat, one hand underneath the pier, kind of let myself up so I could make sure that the number on the boat was the proper one. It was P202. Went right back underneath the boat, and I don't think Chris and I spent more than a minute there. All we did was take the backpack off, clip it onto the boat around the shaft, prepared the clock, armed it. I checked everything. Chris and I went back under the pier, and we started on our way out. The charger went off exactly on time. Some people that were across the way that had set their watches to mine counted it down, and that charge went right off. The boat actually came pretty much out of the water. As a matter of fact, a piece of it landed next to a friend of mine who gave it back to me 3 months later. Came back and gave me a piece of the hull and said, "Hey, this is from your boat."
3 platoons from SEAL Team 4 assaulted Paitea Airfield, intending to disable the Learjet Noriega kept there. Heavy resistance met the SEALs at the airfield. In the firefight that followed, 4 SEALs were killed and 11 wounded.
We had marched up the airfield, divided into 2 8-man groups, SEAL platoon, 16 men. Sort of an L formation where the other 8 men were kind of off, up a little north of the airfield, off the flank. And my second 8-man group, who we were in charge of using small arms fire to fire on Noriega's Learjet. So we started to do that, disabled the plane, and we get a call in, and all the gunfire that was going on, we suddenly got a call in that we were taking fire and the other squad had been hit. So my Lieutenant Phillips, sends Chief and I over to, because I was a corpsman, to go over and deal with the wounded. So we run over there and running right in the middle of a firefight that's going on. 2 other supporting platoons had run up to come up as we were taking on fire. And Chief and I ran right in the middle of this firefight. We have a platoon behind us firing through us, and we have people in the hangar firing through us. Chief got hit right away. And so it ended up just being me out there administering what aid I could at the time, trying to get people from the other platoons to come running up, and as they did, several of them were hit.
Eventually, Noriega was captured and sent to the United States for trial. Panama was returned to local civilian rule, and democratic elections held.
The guys that were hit were my best friends. I knew what they smelled like in the dark,
The tradition in the teams is to celebrate the life of a fallen comrade.
Basically, you buy a keg. The problem that happened at Paitea, Ross Perot came in and got a beer truck, parked it in the compound. We all went from the memorial service right to the beer truck.
We tried to celebrate him as we knew him, as we had lived with him, that we knew what type of person he was, or whoever it was, that we had the pleasure to live with this guy to the age of 21 or 24 or 35, or the honor of knowing him, and that's what it was. It was our salute to him to say goodbye.
The SEALs performed vital actions during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. SEALs helped rescue downed pilots, boarded and searched ships in the Persian Gulf, and performed reconnaissance operations against Iraqi forces.
Desert Storm, as you know, was a campaign. It was a campaign first to come up with a plan to defend Saudi Arabia, and then ultimately to not only defend Saudi Arabia, but to return Kuwaiti to the rightful owners.
On February 24th, 1991, a small unit of SEALs staged a landing on a Kuwaiti beach. Thinking an invasion had begun, Iraqi forces moved to the beach areas. The deception worked, and coalition forces moved across the Kuwaiti border.
We were tasked with seeing if there were any mine-laying activities or troop movements or anything of consequence going on up there. We saw quite a few things going on, and we're there on the border the night that the war actually started.
Within 100 hours, Hussein's army had been defeated, and Kuwait was free. The specter of mass starvation caused the United States to join in UN efforts to provide relief to Somalia in the early 1990s. The United States began Operation Restore Hope in December 1992, sending in military forces to Somalia. The SEALs joined with other forces to conduct this mission. Local warlords fighting for control of the area constantly interrupted relief efforts. Because of this hostile environment, SEAL snipers were utilized. This silent option played a crucial role in providing safety for the UN troops. In a reflection of the combat missions of their forefathers, SEALs conducted night hydrographic reconnaissance. They measured the waters with handheld lead lines, just as the UDTs did during World War II.
In terms of our evolvement, our evolution in warfare and in history of our military, the Navy SEALs have evolved since 1962 to today. We moved through Vietnam and had very great success doing what we could do in a very limited war. But as the world moved on and the U.S. took a different role in terms of now being the only superpower in the world, and its burden to have to provide leadership across the world and all the nations, enemies and friends, the Navy SEAL has evolved with that.
And the SEALs continue to evolve. The Sea, Air, and Land Commandos have now undertaken the challenges of a new frontier: space.
We have ignition and liftoff of Discovery.
A SEAL joined the space program directly in the 1980s. Captain William Shepard has completed 3 space shuttle missions and has been assigned to be the first commander of the International Space Station.
What I'd like to bring to the space station and the space program is pretty much the kinds of things I did in SEAL team or in a UDT platoon as a platoon JO. I want to have a good team. I want people to be able to do their jobs well and know what they're doing. I want to be able to be given a nice, clear mission and get it done.
The world is not becoming a safer place. Instability is going to continue to grow. But like Plato said, only the dead have seen the end of war.
As long as people are people, they will supply their need, and ultimately they'll go to greed. And anytime there's greed, there'll be a need for a SEAL.
The stories are fascinating, but ladies and gentlemen, the men are here today. Take the time to meet them. Take the time to thank them. I want to say to all you veterans, I have never been cold. I have never been hungry. I look forward to tomorrow. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless America.
There are no limits to what SEALs can do. There's no place that's too far, too high, no water that's too cold, and that's just the way SEALs are.
You'll never be with a group of people that care that much about you and will do and sacrifice that much with you and for you.
The Trident connects, I think, every team guy. It connects him to all those that have come before him, from the guys that started off in World War II and the NCDUs all the way up to the guys that are just coming out of BUDS and the guys that we just gave Tridents to today.
That I love you so much, I'm willing to die with you. I'll die for you. There's no way I'm going to leave you in the field, dead or alive.
The team came first. My teammates came first. And it's never give up, never ever give up. Never.
We're fathers, we're sons, we're brothers.
I'm a frogman. I'm a SEAL.
The level of pride that I have in wearing this is really difficult to express. What is even more difficult to express is the honor to lead a community of 5,000 people of Naval Special Warfare sailors. It just, it's mind-boggling.
The Trident itself is a breast insignia that, and the lower part of it has an anchor indicating the branch of service, United States Navy. And the Neptune's scepter is crossed with the anchor that indicates that we work from the sea and under the sea. There's a cocked pistol. That's an old flintlock type pistol, showing that we're always at the ready. But to me, the most important part of it is the American eagle. You'll find the American eagle in a lot of places. In all of these places, he's standing erect, and he's standing tall and proud. But only on the trident does he bow his head. And as I think back of the men in combat and the ones that are always standing on the edge, and those that have lost their lives and been wounded, I think I can understand why he bows his head.
I think that the term elite is overused. And to me, I think just SEAL is enough.